Welcome to Contrary Research Radio, the podcast that dives deep into the world's most exciting private tech companies. I'm Kyle Harrison, general partner at Contrary, and today we're talking to a company that is tackling not only one of the largest, but also one of the most important industries in the world, chemicals. In fact, it's difficult to overstate how massive the chemicals industry is. It is a $5 trillion market, trillion with a T. It touches 96% of all manufactured goods, from the shampoo you use this morning to the phone that's in your pocket. Think about the car that you drive or the food that you eat. Chemicals are literally everywhere. But despite being everywhere, the chemicals industry still operates basically the same way it did 100 years ago, completely offline. The traditional sales model in the chemicals industry is shockingly manual. Picture a maze of phone calls and face-to-face meetings, just a painfully manual process. Also, the industry is surprisingly fragmented. Even the largest companies in the world, who are generating billions of dollars of revenue each year, each of them makes up only about 1% of the market share. On top of that, there's tens of thousands of other vendors that are all doing the same thing. This is a tough market to compete in. But what if somebody could come along and take all the steps in the buying process and make them work together? That's where Knowde comes in. They're an online marketplace of makers and buyers of chemicals, polymers, and a bunch of other words that I can't pronounce. Knowde lists over 100,000 different products, and they have thousands of storefronts, some of them sponsored by massive companies like Dow, DuPont, and Unilever. Knowde is the largest marketplace of its kind, and it's where buyers can come, find what they're looking for, compare prices, and close the deal on any chemical product they could possibly want. The company was founded in 2019 by Ali Amin-Javaheri. The goal of Knowde is to bring the chemicals industry online by offering a catalog of chemicals, buyer collaboration, and sales and marketing tools to make it easier for sellers to find their buyers. So, to help us understand how Knowde works as both a product and a business, we're joined by founder and CEO Ali Amin-Javaheri. Ali, thank you so much for doing this. I'm excited to get to dig in with you.
Of course, it's great to see you again.
I was thinking as I was kind of thinking about questions and some of the things that I wanted to chat with you about, and one of the things that I love that is fairly unique for you is I feel like the problem that you are solving today, you could kind of trace its roots back like your whole life, your childhood. Your dad was a chemical engineer, I think worked at DuPont, right? I can't think of a better sort of founder market fit experience. I think very few people have the sort of, rooted in their childhood and now are trying to tackle the thing that they grew up kind of exposed to. And so I'm very excited to get to dig into that story and how the business has evolved.
Yeah, I mean, in tech, there's not that many chemical engineers, let alone folks that know anything about this market. And so it is fairly unique. And yeah, I mean, my life history, I think, has kind of set the company up for where we are today.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
tell me too, walk me through the story. Cause what's interesting is, so I grew up, my dad was in accounting for a while, worked in companies, whatever. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I was off making videos and on YouTube and stuff like that. And then eventually kind of came back around to the life and the world that my dad kind of operated in. I'm curious to hear the experience of what was like growing up. Were you always interested in it? Did you come back to it, dance with it, whatever? And then how did it bring you to the aha moment of this is where I want to solve problems?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely grew up in it. I mean, he worked in the industry as I was growing up. I mean, he was at a joint venture between the Iran state-owned oil company and DuPont in Iran. And he loved it. It was a lot of fun. I mean, as a chemical engineer, kind of building a plant, especially that was that innovative back in the day, was just an amazing experience. And he just talked to me about it all the time. And his experiences certainly rubbed off. And I just grew to sort of build a passion for this space so early. I mean, most people, haven't spent literally a minute of their lives thinking about this industry. I mean, it's too nebulous. It's too hard to kind of wrap your head around what it even is. But for that reason alone, it just seemed like such a cool space. I mean, nothing is possible around us without it. So
Yeah.
it's such an amazing space. And so yeah, I grew up around it. And then when we traveled around the world and eventually settled into the Northwest, obviously not a ton of industry, not a lot of chemical industry over there. And so I just figured that, I'd go work for some tech company and that would be that. And then to be able to start my career at a company that was kind of at the intersection of chemical and tech was amazing. I mean, just the odds of that alone is so low. And then at that point, I got sucked right back in, and fast forward 20 some years later, I'm still in it.
So good. And tell me that story, because it was, if I remember correctly, I've heard you talk about this where I think it was Chempoint, right? And you kind of, stumbled on them when you were in college. They had kind of a crappy website. What was the something is here. There's something for me to want to spend more time here.
I mean, the first thing was just like the coincidence. I mean, there is some biotech up in Seattle, but not much more than that. And so, the fact that it was a super early stage company that was wanting to pull the industry online, that had folks in the company that were just really passionate about the space, attracted me a ton to it. And frankly, they had me at hello. I mean, they could have said anything and I would have still joined, and it's not like they paid me a lot of money. So I had certainly had to be passionate about it. And I absolutely loved the experience. I mean, I think that company was probably a little too early for its time. Even today, this industry is still kind of starting to dip their toes into all things digital. And so imagine what it was like 20 years ago when that company started. It was probably a little too early.
Yeah.
But amazing experience, and I was there for a lot of years.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that is interesting is there is this sort of you can call it maybe like a Silicon Valleyism, right? It's a sort of Peter Thiel, big markets attract lots of competitors. And so you want to find these niche spaces, and competition is for suckers, and then grow in that, expand your market, whatever. It's like, talk about market sizes. It's like, this is a $5 trillion global industry. It touches every aspect of life. You would think that people would be tripping over themselves to sell technology here. But it's really, as far as I understand it from having talked to you a bunch of times before, there's some kind of behavioral wall where it's like, not only is there crappy technology here, it's like there's basically no technology. How can such a big industry have avoided being totally overrun with people trying to sell them technology?
It's a fantastic question. I think there's a lot of reasons for it. One is that the idea of going into the chemical industry from a tech perspective just feels daunting. I mean, just the term of it alone, it's like, it feels like it's just like too heavy. Most tech companies just would never enter into this space unless you're called like SAP and like you're in Germany and you're around all these chemical companies. This isn't one of those spaces where somebody from outside the industry can like hop online and learn about it and know everything that they need to know in order to go build a tech company in this space. This industry is incredibly opaque. Like, you can't find what you need to learn in order to go build a company here. In most markets, it's so transparent. Like, you can find out who the big players are, where they play in the value chain, how much margin they take off the table. I mean, you can learn all these sort of things in almost every market, but you can't in this one. And so it keeps a lot of tech companies out of it. For those that even try to build something in this space, once they get going, they realize, oh my gosh, like, there is a lot of complexity here, and just being able to get into the door of one of these companies is incredibly challenging. You can't just knock on the door and think that they're going to give you a meeting. I mean, this industry is for the insiders. And so it just has a lot of like natural friction and natural moats that keep competitors out. I mean, I think I mentioned this to you a while back. I mean, most chemical companies in our industry still to this day do not have a CRM. They're running multi-billion-dollar companies without like customer-facing tech. I hear founders saying all the time things like, this is a paper and pen industry, and they're probably exaggerating a little bit. And it's like, no, in this one, it's like Post-it notes and pencils. I mean, it's wild. But I will say, like, I don't want to like ridicule the industry in that way. When it comes to like back office technology, supply chain, manufacturing, it's second to none. I mean, what they do in their plants is unbelievable. I mean, top tier. I mean, these are chemical engineers, so like they're process engineers. They know how to use tech in manufacturing. It's just that they don't have the same capabilities in the front of the house.
It's interesting because it feels like what you're describing is where the science lives, they are second to none, right? It's like that is their expertise, is that they have created the things that make the world go round, and they're these large companies, they can't be beat in the processes that they've built. When it comes to the sales process, do you think it is more a function of like they are the only game in town to some extent. Like there's a lot of these big players and they are the vast majority of the market. And so the buyers have to come to them and they've just never needed that? Or is there enough fragmentation that it's like there would be plenty of efficiency? It's just that it's that they're stubborn. It's that they don't need to, their sales are high enough. Like what is that behavioral blocker?
It's a fantastic question, something that, I wrestle with myself
Yeah,
to this
totally.
day. Um, so most folks in these companies are engineers of some sort. They didn't cut their teeth in leading edge marketing and sales organizations and then come here, right? They kind of grew up within the industry in a process engineering role and a back office role of some sort. And then they realized, well, this person seems fairly charismatic and knows how to carry a conversation. Let them go talk to customers. And that's how they end up building out their sales teams. And they've just sort of done it that way for a really, really long time. And it's not that there's anything wrong with like field sales and relationships and all those sort of things. I mean, so many businesses to this day are still built on that. However, like it's still solely built on that. Like they haven't thought through what does inside sales look like? What does digital sales look like? What does it mean to run digital marketing campaigns? I mean, they're still in the early stages of that. And I think partly because of what I said, which is they're sort of grown up in that company. They've only seen it done a certain way. They don't have outside exposure, and so they just don't bring that sort of different perspective into the organization. And then at the same time, there's not a lot of companies knocking on their door saying, hey, you should do it differently. And let me give you some new ideas. So they're learning about all this in real time. They're just now sort of getting exposed to it because like if you're not called SAP and maybe to a smaller extent Microsoft, you're not knocking on these guys' doors. So if you're the CMO of Dropbox, I mean, I can't even imagine how much inbound you're getting from like somebody trying to sell you something. Whereas the VP of marketing at so-and-so Chemco, Zippo. I mean, there's nobody
Yeah.
there. So you're just not exposed to it. You don't know.
And so now, like, let's take that from a lens of Node and how you decided to build in this space. You've been just entrenched in it your whole life. You're working in this industry. You're seeing these inefficiencies that exist. What was it that drew you to solve problems with Node the way you're doing it and articulate that? Like, what exactly do you think of
Yeah.
Node as breaking into the space to do?
The front of house is by far the most interesting for me because that's where the interaction happens between the buyers and the sellers, right? And so if you're a buyer of chemistry, which is basically every physical good company in the world, you rely on chemistry in order to go make your product. It's literally the foundation of every physical good. Think about the amount of innovation that happens with all this chemistry. Like if you're somebody that works at Tesla or Unilever, Procter and Gamble or whatever, you're working with chemistry all day long in order to go build your thing. And the thought that always crossed my mind is how can you totally innovate on that product if you don't have massive transparency in the market in terms of like what these products do and why I should use it and what its value proposition is and all that? Like why am I hunting for a sales rep to get a little bit of information? Why am I waiting 7 days to get a document that describes what this product is? Like that just makes no sense. And so like to an extent, like our industry has limited the innovation that so many of these companies can do. Like if you want the car to be lighter and drive faster, like that's the chemical industry that's going to solve that problem. And like if we don't give folks access to this knowledge, they're never going to be able to do it. And so the aha or the really important solve that we wanted to make was that most of this industry's knowledge, product knowledge, like chemical knowledge, sits in documents. Each product has 5 different types of documents. Each one of these documents are 2 to 10 pages, and they describe like what the product is, why you should use it. Hey, Tesla, here's why you should care. But those documents aren't exposed to the world. They sit behind the firewall, or they're just sitting in PDFs. And so what we wanted to do is get access to all of those documents and organize and structure all that data and make it accessible to everyone. We knew that we wouldn't be able to create amazing customer experiences unless we could solve this product dilemma. Because like at the end of the day, when that engineer from Tesla is learning about chemistry, they want to understand the product. And if they can't get access to that product data, then there's a terrible customer experience there. And so that's the core of Node. That's how we came up with the name Node. Most people don't know that. It's this merge of knowledge and a graph database and the nodes of a database. How do we organize, structure, and harmonize all this unstructured data that exists in our industry? And if we could unlock that, then you're going to unlock amazing customer experiences.
There's a couple of businesses like this where it's like you build a core infrastructure layer, right? You do one thing well, and it gives you the extensibility to do a lot of other things because you did that sort of hard thing up front, right? It feels like that's something that you guys have sort of tapped into. So tell me about that. Like when you think about this market, you've mentioned before, it's very opaque, right? The information. And I would imagine it's even like the sort of apples to oranges comparison across different companies, right? Maybe they don't call the same compound the same thing or have the same, nomenclature or whatever. So how did you tackle that intense complexity across all these different companies to sort of lay that foundation for the product?
You're totally right. There's a lot of markets that still aren't like digitized, and in order to transform them, you have to figure out what the root of the problem is. Like, why is it not getting transformed? I spent 15 years trying to figure out like the why. And all roads ended up leading back to this product data issue. Like nobody could figure out how to unpack those documents and organize that data. It is a very complex problem because you're dealing with technical information that's in paragraph form, not always like in table forms. Like table forms, sure, you can write the right scripts and all that to get the data out of there, but like we're talking deep in these documents.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Very, very challenging problem to solve. But then as you pull out all these attributes for every product, then you've got to harmonize it, right? So I'll give you a very real example. If you're selling chemistry into a cosmetic application, think about all the different ways you can even refer to cosmetics. Beauty care, personal care, cosmetic. I mean, there's like 15 synonyms for the exact same thing. And so you not only have to extract the right terms, you've got to harmonize it against every single possible thing that anybody can call it. Otherwise, if you create a filter, right, to try to find what you're looking for, you don't want 15 different versions of the same term showing up. And so we essentially are organizing the entire world of physical goods because like chemistry is sold into everything. You've got to unpack all that data, create a taxonomy or classification system for every type of physical good, and then map all those terms back to it. So yeah, it was certainly a difficult problem to solve.
Yeah. You created the sort of universal language for an industry that refused to kind of speak the same language. And so it feels like that gives you this really powerful platform upon which to sort of start from. But then the second thing I would imagine is that you sort of build this initial platform, and then you go out and you start having these conversations, you're saying, hey, here's how valuable it can be. There's probably a sort of behavioral blocker where you're going out and people are saying, well, like this is just how I do things. Like I just do things the way I always do them, right? And I would imagine that something like COVID is sort of just completely disrupts this industry where people have built their entire relationship on I go talk to that person, now I can't go talk to that person as easily. What was that like as you guys are sort of into the building the solution, sort of engaging with these people that now maybe had an interruption in the way that they had always been doing things?
Yeah, that is a very insightful question. So this industry just has relied on the same go-to-market model forever. And there are certainly days that I woke up and was like, you know what? It may be another 20 years. Like, who knows, right? I mean, because there's no outside forces that are forcing these companies to think differently. And from the inside, they don't think differently. And so there's certainly the timing question that goes through your mind all the time. God bless COVID. It caused a lot of companies to think differently because, like, if their sales went up, they were thinking to themselves, wait a minute, all our sales reps are sitting at home doing nothing. Why are sales going up? And then if their sales went down, they're like, oh, whoa, we are way over dependent on our field salespeople. We need other ways of being able to engage customers. So it's kind of this awakening moment. And because it went on for a couple of years, it caused them to really have to sit in their pain for a little while. Now, it's not like COVID came and went and they all of a sudden said, throw $1 billion into digital transformation and let it rip. There's still a lot of behavioral things that have to change. But if that event didn't happen, I would certainly still be waking up thinking like, is the timing off?
It feels like every market that shifts, there's like a core driver, whether that's like a specific person or role, or whether it's like customer demand or whatever. What do you feel like today is the main tailwind you guys are riding, right? That's sort of making it possible for you to go have the conversations that you're having. And when you do see success, it's like, it's because so and so gets it, or it's because this situation was right. Like, what's that driver for you guys?
It always starts with an individual that's within their digital team that holds a P&L or in their transformation team that just gets it. Because if we're having to go in there and educate from like scratch and try to create an initiative, we're dead in the water. There has to be a mindset in the organization that we have to change. Once that's in place, it usually then ends up as a commercial conversation where they think to themselves, wait a minute, think about how many beauty care brands are out there. There's probably 10 that pop up every day. And if you sell a lot of raw materials into that space, like how do I get in front of them? Like I can't rely on one person. I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. Like I was talking to a chemical company yesterday, very, very large one, that has 3M. I mean, you know who 3M is.
Yeah,
They
totally.
have 3M as a client, and they've got one sales rep that manages 3M. And they were literally for 10 minutes trying to convince me that that one sales rep knows everything happening at 3M. You know, this person, let's just call him Bob for now because there's a lot of those guys in our industry. Um, he's owned 3M for 10 years and he knows everything. It's like, wait a minute, do you realize how many people work at 3M? And like, do you know how many active projects are happening there every day that you could be selling chemistry into? Like, dude, Bob does not manage 3M.
Yeah, God bless Bob. There's just not enough capacity in the human brain.
There's not enough capacity in the human brain. And those same engineers don't know that Bob exists. And so they're just going online. The other one that I should mention, which is a really, really big one, is that the buy side of the market has gotten a lot younger over the past like 5 years.
Oh, interesting.
So the folks that work at the Unilevers and Teslas and all that are noticeably younger now than they were 5 years ago. And their patience for blue blazers and briefcases are fairly low. And so like, hey, if you're not making the information accessible, you're not going to have a seat at the table.
One of the complexities I think that you have when because you mentioned this before, right, where you are enabling this interaction, this transaction, like the front office is a really interesting place where you can empower those types of transactions. But one of the complexities with that is that introduces you to a very broad swath of stakeholders, right? If you're selling one thing to one person, one widget, one app to one person, that person is the only person you have to convince. When you're part of a transaction, you have buyers, you have sellers, and the sellers need to get value and the buyers need to have value. There's sort of this marketplace element that everybody faces where they have to solve multiple stakeholders' problems. Do you guys feel like there is a sort of equal balance where you need to be creating as much value for both? Or is there, hey, if we can just convince the buyers that this is where they need to be, the sellers will come because they realize we need to get in front of those people. Once they realize the sort of frailties of Bob's limitations, they'll realize they need you.
Yeah, that's another very good question. So like I was just mentioning, like the buy side is a lot younger and more accustomed to using all the tools that you would expect. The supply side is not. However, the supply side in our market has a lot more power than like the suppliers in Amazon or Etsy
Right,
or whatever.
sure.
Think about all the different suppliers for any particular SKU on Amazon. There's tons of them. And if one of them doesn't want to play ball, you just go work with somebody else. Whereas in our market, the suppliers have a lot more power. And so you need to get more of them on board. And therein lies the challenge because the suppliers are the ones that are a little stodgier and a little bit more risk averse and all those sort of things. And so I wish we could have just like gotten a bunch of buyers and said, hey, suppliers come, because it just didn't work that way. Like we had to go after the suppliers directly and get them to come, which was certainly a challenge for a few years.
Sure. So walk me through that. What is the core value prop of what you're offering? What is that for the suppliers and what is that for the buyers? Like what do they most resonate with?
On the supply side, it's more customer reach, just getting my catalog in front of more customers and making it easier for my customers to be able to discover my products, learn about my products and all of that. Make it a lot easier for them to like proactively engage their sales team rather than their sales team constantly going out and trying to hunt new business. It's a massive value proposition. This market is incredibly fragmented and there's just no way you can reach all these customers. So if you can find a way to get them to come to you, saves a ton of money and time. On the buy side, it's all about convenience. Like, how do I find who all the sources are of particular raw materials and how do I learn about it and engage with them as quickly as possible? Because it's hard for me to kind of paint a picture of how opaque and difficult this industry has always been. If you're working at, I'll keep using the same example, Tesla, and you're trying to lightweight the materials of your car so that it's more efficient, you solve that problem through the chemicals and the polymer companies. And you need access to information to be able to know, like, hey, how do I go innovate on this product? And finding the information is terribly hard. Finding the right Bob in each of these organizations is terribly hard. And so it just slows you down. Like something that should take 4 hours takes 4 days or 4 weeks or 4 months. It's just incredibly challenging. So from the buy side, it's all about like organization of information, transparency of that information, and access to knowledge.
Yeah. The buy side makes a ton of sense to me, obviously, because of how ubiquitous the end product is. It's in every aspect of life. That makes total sense that it's everybody. Like, it's so difficult to go aggregate that. And I want to talk about that in a second. But when I think about the supply side, those suppliers, is it like, 70% of the market is 5 suppliers and then there's the long tail? Or like, how fragmented are we talking on the supplier side?
The supplier side is also a lot more fragmented than people think. It's not as fragmented as the buyer side for obvious reasons, but the supply side's also very fragmented. I'll give you some numbers so you can wrap your head around it. There's about 15 to 20,000 suppliers in the world, and the largest one has less than 1% of market share.
Who's the largest? Like, what are those, like, the names we might know, those chemical companies?
So BASF, Sinopec, Dow Chemical.
So those are less than 1% of the market. Are those? I mean, those are some of those. Like, everybody has heard those names. They may not know what in their life they're interacting with that has come from that company, but everybody knows that those are the sort of big dogs. And so you're saying even those big names, 1% maybe of market share.
Yeah, I mean, it's for the number that you threw out at the top, 5 trillion.
It's crazy.
5 trillion's a lot.
Crazy.
And so, like, the biggest companies are 50 billion, and 50 billion is a massive company. And 50 billion in revenue is a thing.
It's a good day's work. Yeah.
A day's work. And so, like, if you're the largest at 50 billion by nature, you can't have more than 1%.
Wild. That's crazy. And so then let's switch to the buyer side. So it's so fragmented. One of the things that's been really interesting when you look at a lot of consumer marketplaces, I always think about this analogy when it comes to this idea of like buyer aggregation. Shopify versus Etsy. Shopify has a single-digit % take rate because they're basically saying, hey, we're going to give you the tools, but then Godspeed. If you don't have a brand, if you don't have distribution, like, good luck getting in front of people. Whereas Etsy, I get on Etsy, I list my stuff. They have this sort of consumer interface that they're going to put your stuff in front of people without you ever realizing it. And that's great. But that also means that they have a, double-digit take rate, low 20s, I think, or whatever, right? That's the kind of dichotomy. For you, when you think about this mechanism of buyer aggregation, it is so fragmented. How do you get them to look at you when they start asking that question versus anywhere else that they could look? I guess there's like not a lot of places they could look is calling up more people, but how do you get them to make sure they land on Node?
So a big play for us is all things SEO. Because all the product information is trapped in PDFs and a lot of times behind the firewall, that gives us an amazing opportunity, which is that we can race out ahead. And if we can unpack all this information and make it indexable, then all of a sudden the node links in 3 years from now are like the Wikipedia links. And so that is our customer acquisition strategy, or the buy-side acquisition strategy, which is these folks are online all the time, browsing, looking, trying to figure out who's got what and like why I should use certain products. And our objective is to drive them to Node and then make it really clear that, okay, you found information about a product when you clicked on this link. Now back out and go explore everything that you could possibly explore.
It reminds me of, we did a little bit of research on Canva for another research report that we did. And they have a very similar thought process where they're trying to address this long tail of design use cases, right? Yeah. And it's something like, I think they have 70 different landing pages, and each of those landing pages has, 50 to 100 different possible, like it's like literally like wedding invites, creating a wedding invite. And then it's like, well, what kind of wedding is it? And what location is it? Or like, there's different pages of information, whatever. For you guys, it's like literally just the world of products and combinations of things. How do you manage such a massive SEO problem?
Dude, it's complex, and I'm not going to suggest that like we've got it figured out because if you go to Node and start browsing around the mega menu, you'll realize that oh wow, these guys literally are sitting on top of the entire world, and they're trying to organize everything from ag to pharma to automotive to whatever. I mean, like everything we're trying to organize. And so you naturally have tons of content across tons of different markets and applications and everything else. The opportunity that we have that I think is unlike a lot of other companies is that the world hasn't seen a lot of this content, and it makes us unique. So I was thinking back to this story about an investor told me in like 2020. He's like, I've done so much research about all these marketplaces that try to build through SEO. As he was doing his research, he said most of these companies will struggle because like their keywords are so saturated. Like we go do a bunch of research in terms of like pay per clicks and like who's at the top and all these things. And when they did the research on the chemical industry, they're like, this may be the last remaining sort of greenfield opportunity on Google because there's just no content out there.
That's so interesting. Well, I'd imagine it's also like it's pretty esoteric, right? It's like there's just not that many people talking about these very specific things. If you guys even sort of whisper it on Google, you're going to jump to the top because you're the only thing that's really answering the question.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's super interesting. So bring me back to today. So we've talked about like this is how you've kind of thought about sort of bringing these pieces together. Maybe a way to think about it is, and I don't know what the right metric is, whether it's like the percentage of suppliers or the percentage of transactions or whatever. But when you think about there's the sort of this $5 trillion universe, what percentage of it is on Node? Maybe not even like transacting on Node, but like you have available surface area information. Like how do you think about the dent that you've made thus far?
Yep. We measure the dent through the density of suppliers, and in total, there's probably upwards of 20,000, maybe a little bit more as you go into Asia Pacific, just because like over there it's like super, super opaque. But taking China out of the mix, roughly 15, 16,000. Today if you go on Node, you can find suppliers up, I think we've got up to maybe 7,800 of them. And so we've got a considerable amount of surface area,
Yeah.
a considerable amount of surface area. From that perspective, a buyer can come in and sort of browse the largest catalog that's ever been made in this industry. And it's all harmonized, which is the most important thing, right? So I'm looking for a cosmetic ingredient. It's harmonized across 7,800 suppliers. That's the beauty, is that I can click a couple filters and all of a sudden I can find everything under the sun for half the market. That's why they keep coming back.
Are there some of these multi-billion-dollar yet still 1% or less market share whales that you're hunting? Like who are the dreams where it's like, man, if we could get so and so on the platform or whatever, we don't have them yet. Who are the sort of holdouts that you'd love to break in?
I mean, we've gotten a good number of them at this point. When they do come in, it's not always the entire organization. It's a classic sort of land and expand. I mean, I'll take a great example like BASF. We're very proud to have them as a customer, but it takes time to get the entire organization to adopt. You wedge in with one or two divisions of the 15 that they have, and you keep educating the other divisions as to why they should join. It's a grind for sure, but like in these big orgs, you've got to find the right champion in the right division and then just keep expanding, expanding, expanding.
And then stepping back, so when you think about the success you've had to date and sort of the obstacles or the sort of challenges going forward, like what are the things now you've kind of laid this foundation, you have the sort of schema of knowledge, the universal language, right, that lets you get into these thousands and thousands of suppliers. What's the next kind of mountain to climb for Node?
When we started the company, we never said that we were going to just build a marketplace. That was actually not our intent at all. Our intent was to organize product data, and we knew that if we unlocked that, we could unlock a lot of other things down the road. And so our core competency today and tomorrow is going to remain like the organization and taxonomy of product data. Now, what we end up doing with that could be really cool stuff. Like I'll give you a great example. All the software that we've built within the marketplace, we've now made accessible within the supplier's own website. And so nobody's locked into a marketplace. Like we've said since day one that we just want to help this industry transform. And so if you can take now the organization of your own product data and take our software and embed it into your own website and give customers that are coming to your website an amazing experience, by all means, like do that. I'll give you another great use case. Now that we've organized their product data, they think to themselves, wow, like you can now help enable my sales team when they're doing those field sales calls. So like imagine you go to Unilever and you're having a conversation around the cosmetic ingredients. There's no way as a sales rep you can remember all the different products that you could possibly sell into that application. You need help. And so now I've got an amazing sales enablement tool that will tell me what I should recommend next. And so the root of the problem is what we had to solve, which is the product data. And I think it can unlock all sorts of things in the future.
Super interesting. And like when you think about what that means for the product, like the way that the product evolves, a couple of the things I've noticed, and I don't know the timelines of when you've launched these things, but it feels like step one was just get this stuff online, like get people interacting online and talking about these things, making transactions. The second piece is like, all right, how do we sort of streamline or lower the friction? The two things that struck me what were really interesting is number one, I think being able to offer ads on the platform and be able to target the folks that are most interesting to you as a seller. That feels really powerful. And then it reminds me of sort of Jeff Bezos famously not wanting to get into the advertising business for years and years. And now last year, Amazon's advertising business was $30-40 billion of revenue, right? It feels like that's really powerful because if you're the place where people are talking about this stuff, the ability to help serve those ads and build that experience is really powerful. And then maybe more recently, the sort of website optimization and customer experience platform and helping these conversations between buyers and sellers be even more streamlined. It feels like I can see those kind of evolution points, but help me understand, like, well, how do you think about the product and has it changed? Yeah. What's been the biggest changes to that product?
Because we're dealing with such a big market that's so greenfield and new to tech and all that, your mind can almost explode with all the directions you can take it. And like one of the things that we talk a lot internally about is just like trying to remain focused because like it's not like we've raised an infinite amount of capital where we can go pursue 7 different ideas simultaneously.
Sure.
And so we've got to be really, really conscious of where we spend our time. Ads, obvious, right? It's such a huge opportunity. And like in our space, transactions are not like small. I don't know what a typical transaction on Amazon is, maybe $20 or something. In our space, it's thousands upon thousands. An ad play, could be really interesting for us. But there's more fundamental problems that we have to solve for these guys. How they can enable their teams internally and their customers around their newly organized product data. That is one that we're going to still sit on for a little while because there's still a lot of change that needs to happen.
Well, final question for you as you think about, one of the things I think is most interesting, we've talked about this, touched on this a couple times, is that you're really tackling a component of the physical world that like a lot of people don't think about, but it makes the world go round. There are other aspects of that we've seen over the last few years. I feel like it's become more, I don't know, more common, but certainly you've seen a few success stories of other companies tackling similar aspects of the built world. People building in manufacturing, people building in defense, space exploration, industries that a lot of people don't know the inner workings of. Are there companies that you look up to that have built in these types of spaces or in these types of models that you think that, man, there's a ton to learn from that? And my hope is to add as much sort of digital fluidity to this market as other folks have done in other markets?
That's a fantastic question. I mean, look, my head is down all day, every day. Like, all I do is think about this space. I was actually talking to a friend of mine this last weekend that said, hey, I've learned so much about your company and the way it works. Like, you could essentially pick up this whole business model or platform and drop it into X market, and it would work so well. And I'm like, it might, but I literally know nothing about that market. So even if we wanted to, I couldn't. There's so many cool things that are happening around us, and we take little tidbits from each of them and try to bring it into our organization. I've got amazing investors that like flood me with all sorts of articles and stuff because like they've learned our company and like they see all these random parallels, not like a parallel across like everything that we're doing, but like random parallels here and there of like what X company is doing around the root of the problem in that industry that is prohibiting transformation. It's not always product data. It could be a lot of different random things. I love reading stories like that because like you find this little wedge in these organizations where there's a fairly acute amount of pain, and then you create these little dominoes that should fall in the future if you solve that initial pain. And stories like those are the ones that I gravitate the most to. I wish there were more founders in the industrial world that like had the gumption or conviction to like jump out of their very easy jobs to go build companies, because like we need more of these stories. There's not enough VCs sitting in Cleveland and Houston and all these other places that have a ton of need for tech. Those are the ones that need to have their stories written, because there's so many amazing stories that just haven't been written. I mean, dude, how many times are we reading like, a tech story on like, I've like read the same story 15 times. There's 15 other companies that are doing this exact same thing, maybe slightly different. Those are not the ones that I gravitate toward.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I love the, and we've talked about this before too, the sort of trailblazing that you're doing where hopefully the goal is like you want to unlock these kind of, jokingly, these like mad scientists that are sort of wasting away, just frustrated in the world that they live in, but feeling like there's not a mechanism by which to go and transform this industry that I know so well. Hopefully folks can look at you and say, hey, that's a model for me to go do something similar in different aspects of the built world, which is cool.
There's so many markets that are just hidden from the rest of the world that nobody really spends a minute of their life thinking about. But it's those markets that are the most critical to the world. Any sort of incremental innovation that happens there can have such a massive trickle-down effect. It needs to happen. Those mad scientists need to get unlocked. I've talked to many of them, and the biggest sort of hesitation they have is that they feel like the venture market is too far removed from their day-to-day. It's so unfamiliar to them as to like how to even get in front of them, how to pitch them, what does it mean to pitch them, like all those sort of things. How do you bring those two worlds a little bit closer together, give them the confidence to jump out of whatever job they're in to go build something?
Yeah, I love that. Well, listen, man, next time you chat with one of those sharp people, you send them my way. Contrary's focus is smart people, bar none. Like, we don't need them to have Venture 101. So send them my way.
That's why I love your guys' story, and I gravitated to you since day one. I mean, I love what you guys are doing, and like I couldn't be a bigger supporter.
Thanks, man. Well, listen, I appreciate it. This has been super fun. It's so fun to get to hear the story, dig into the weeds. Love what you're doing, and appreciate the time.
Of course. Great to see you, Kyle.